All right, our speaker for today is somebody who's very familiar to us and who we always enjoy hearing, especially the beautiful stories that she tells and the wonderful blessing that she gives. So please welcome Reverend Jan Limberg Morgan.
Okay, can you hear me now? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I apologize. A lady inherited an old dog. She lived in a little townhouse with a small garden behind it and didn't realize that the artificial turf there was not acceptable to the old dog. So she had to take him for walks every day. He didn't walk well. She had to drag him out to where the areas where he could be interested in doing whatever it was he had to do. And a neighbor noticed the reluctance of the dog to go, but also the reluctance of the dog to stay in the backyard. And she said to her neighbor, "You know, I have grass. Why don't we make a little space in the fence and he can come through and use the grass in my yard?" That story was on the internet and it's gone viral, but it's just an example of how someone can see something that cannot be changed. The lady couldn't tear up the rented backyard, but someone had seen how it would make it easier, probably more for the dog than the lady who inherited it, but nevertheless, somebody had seen a way of moving around what could not be changed. You know, Mother Teresa said, we can't all do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. We can accept that we can't change much in the world and maybe in our lives, but we don't have to let that stop us from getting on with our lives and our dreams. I have a story to tell you, and it's a story about Clafouti. After the death of Terry's mother, her father was diagnosed with diabetes. He was a life of the party guy. He was the kind that was always up for socializing. But with the diagnosis, he isolated himself. He lived in a senior apartment, and he was depressed about the new diet restrictions, and he stopped socializing with his neighbors and friends. And one night, Terry walked into his apartment with a very delicious smelling dessert, and her father said, "You know I can't eat that." And she said, "You're wrong. On the contrary, your doctor said that you can eat this and it will be good for you." She explained that it was called clafouti, a French baked custard, and a fruit combination. And after thoroughly enjoying a serving, he asked if she would leave the rest for him, which of course she had every intention of doing. And later in the week, Dawn requested of Terry that maybe she would make him another clafouti for the next Saturday. So that Saturday, Dawn invited some of his old friends to join him in the community patio, arranged for someone else to make coffee, and proudly shared his plate of clafouti. Out of that, Saturday nights became potlucks, and they were back in full swing. And Don would always happily share the clafouti because he knew it was safe for him to eat it. And as I thought about that, oh, and by the way, just in case you're curious, there is a clafouti, a pan of clafouti sitting on the share table. So if you're curious, you can try it. Don accepted the diagnosis, and he allowed it to change his life. Terry accepted the diagnosis, and then she searched for ways for Don to live with the change. You know, I have a personal way of accepting things I cannot change. I do what I call holding the high watch. And when I'm aware of a situation over which I have no control, I meditate on it. And I become focused, and I align myself with peace, and I fill myself with a peaceful energy. If I don't know what the outcome needs to be, I simply allow it to unfold in divine and perfect order. But that brings me peace. That is what I can do to accept what is, but know that there is a power in the universe greater than we are that we can use. And in so doing, in that act of meditation, I'm able to remain actively serene. Now, I didn't tell you that the title of my talk was Serenity, Curiosity, and Confidence. I just talked to you about the serenity part. Now we're going to look at acceptance and curiosity. Okay, we're hearing a lot about discrimination and prejudice these days. Excuse me while I take a sip of this and put it down. Sorry, Zoom people. We're hearing a lot about discrimination. But discrimination isn't only about skin color. It's about facial structure. It's about voice accent. It's about life choices. It's about financial status. It's about country or place of origin. I spent 4 years living in London from the ages of just 17 until 21. And 70 years ago, London was an extremely cosmopolitan city, which it's even more so now. But back then, because the British Empire was pretty extensive, there were many people in London that had come in to take advantage of living and working there. And I had friends from many countries. I spoke to you about one of them last time. I found I had my own prejudices. My prejudice had nothing to do with all the other stuff. It had to do with education, not formal education, but with vocabulary and personal behavior. I was offended by people whose behavior was uncouth and not for the comfort of most of us. But that's just a little insight into my own prejudice. I loved meeting new people and learning their stories. And because I always assumed everyone was smarter than I was always looking to find out what I could learn from them and what brought them to London. And in this process, I expanded my awareness and my knowledge of the other countries and other people. And then I married an American serviceman, and I moved 6,000 miles away. And I discovered the prejudice that I encountered was unlike that to which I was used. We were right, they are wrong, period. That applied to religion, to family traditions, and to work ethic. I married into a Swedish family, and I happened to be a Brit, there's only two ways of doing things in that family, and that was the American way and the Swedish way. And if you did things the British way, you were wrong. There was no room for dialogue or acceptance of differences. But you know, this need to be right is based on fear. It's based on the fear of maybe you're wrong. Oh, heaven forbid. The fear of not belonging, the fear of loss of status in the tribe, because you know the best, you know the most, you know what's right. But instead of the right versus wrong, is it possible for us to expand our vocabulary, possibilities, potentiality, variations, inclusion, similarities, differing viewpoints? Instead of they are wrong, can we say, what's their perspective? What's behind the traditions that they were raised with? How can we work together? It doesn't always change the outcome or the relationship, but it makes the process much kinder and more positive. I got a telephone call about a week ago from a dear friend of 30 years, almost all the time I've lived in California. And she didn't need advice. She just wanted to talk and to be heard. She had just extricated herself from a professional relationship. And from her perspective, there was no other solution. And after hearing her story, after listening, I had to agree that I would have taken the same action. And later, when we'd hung up, I was analyzing what I'd heard, and I asked, how could I view the other person differently? Instead of right versus wrong, what were her needs? And from what perspective was she coming? So I meditated on it, which I do frequently. And it was like looking down on a tableau playing out before me. I could see the energy around the two. My friend was coming from her heart. She was wanting the highest and the best for everyone. The other was coming from the head. She needed to fit everything neatly into a little box, all the items on her own agenda. And there was no place here for communication or conciliation, or even agree to disagree. There was no meeting ground in the middle. And I can't even explain to you how it felt to be watching this and kind of understanding this. I knew my friend had taken it into prayer, and I knew she had turned the situation over to Spirit and had then proceeded from that place. Now, sharing my insights with her won't change the outcome, but maybe they can make acceptance of that outcome a little gentler. Let's take a look at self-acceptance, acceptance with confidence. Almost 1,000 years ago, the Persian poet, mathematician, and astronomer Omar Khayyam wrote, "The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on. And all thy piety and wit can't take it back, nor cancel out one word of it." That's a shortened version of. How many of us grew up with poor self-esteem? Not smart enough, not strong enough, don't measure up. Society believed that this was the way to motivate young people, but it frequently backfired. And for many of us, the prevailing religious message was, you are not good enough now. You're to spend your entire life trying to measure up. At the end, we'll tell you if you've succeeded, and if you haven't, there's no heaven for you. And as adults, we bemoan our lack of success, our lack of accomplishment with, oh, if only. Now, if things had been different, I might be more successful. And even some of those that are outwardly confident and appear successful, the inner message is still, you need to be more. As Omar Khayyam states, it is what it is. There's no undoing the past. However, we can totally discard blame and perceiving ourselves as less than or lacking. Most of you know that I am a religious science minister, and one of the colleagues is the Reverend Dr. Ken Gordon. Ken is a Canadian. He's from British Columbia, so we have a little bit of Britain in common here. And he wrote a wonderful thing in the latest Science of Mind. He talked how they grew up without money, but they were never poor. Many times paying the bills was a challenge, but there was always food and there was always love. There were 4 children who were fed, clothed, schooled, and clean. Their recreation was camping, hiking, and fishing. And most of the parents' friends were in the same position, so the kids didn't know any difference. It was only when he got older that he discovered not everyone had lived like them, and he was bitterly disappointed at what appeared to be his station in life. Old cars, old clothes, old problems. But when he began his own family, he discovered the treasure that he had been given by his parents. His dad was a great outdoorsman. He could ride a horse, paddle or row a boat, find food in the woods like no one else. He could build a shelter without tools, start a fire without matches. There were the 4 kids to feed, and they grew up eating wild food foraged from the forest, fish they'd caught themselves, vegetables and fruit they'd either grown or picked, and wild birds, venison, moose, and shellfish. And looking back, he realized what an idyllic life he had been raised with. What a gift he had been given. A life of appreciating simple things and communing with nature. Ken came to terms with his humble background. He viewed it all as a gift, and he made that gift the foundation of the rest of his life. Dr. Ken Gordon, when the 2 elements of science of mind, religious science, came together, he was the leader for 8 years. He had established a church in Kelowna, British Columbia, and has a very well-known figure in that science of mind community. And I felt very grateful that he had chosen to share his early experiences and his own reaction to them and what they meant to him now, because it aligned itself with some of my story. And when I was preparing When I prepare talks, I take meditation breaks while I'm writing or while I'm thinking or while I'm researching. And I got a huge insight when I was writing this talk. How can I tell you about self-acceptance until I've done my own work? You know, I have spent most of my life making sure that everyone else was okay. My comfort didn't matter until they were comfortable. But in the last 6 years, there's been a drastic change. And I've learned that I must keep my own well filled before I can share. Contemplating myself as a teenager in London, I recognize I always expanded my vocabulary in order to understand others, listening to their stories, what can I learn? But that was my way of conciliating, accepting, and being accepted. And I recognize and accept that I've sought connection with the divine my whole life. I remember hiding in the parish church in Wales for hours. It was the only place I felt safe. Being drawn back time and again to St. John's Chapel in the Tower of London, a very sparse, beautiful space that was without sound, incredible space. Not wanting to leave St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle because the connection there was so strong. Walking to the front at a Billy Graham event, much to the chagrin of my boyfriend. Embracing the Mormon Church and being married in the temple, the Holy of Holies, and renouncing my ties with the church on the death of my husband, thus excluding myself from heaven for eternity. Walking into a Science of Mind church and realizing I had come home. Walking on fire 6 times in the mountains of Alabama, attempting to expand my awareness of the presence of the divine in all situations. And finally accepting that I am a soul seeking to connect with Source, a spiritual being in a human experience, and none of the old stuff matters. None of the old stuff matters. Now, I've shared my personal mantra with you before, but it just absolutely feels right to do it again. Whenever I sit to pray, and I do every morning, I have my prayer routine and my list of people I pray for. I always start with, I know who I am. I am a beloved of the divine. I am a unique creation of the one creator. I am an essential aspect of the universe. I am a being of love and light, and I know that that which is true for me must be true for all beings. We know who we are. We know we're beloveds of the divine. We know we are unique creations of the one creator. We know we are essential aspects of the universe. We know we are beings of love and light. And we know and accept that that which is true for us must be true for all beings. We know this from the center of our beings. We can walk forward when we do, facing life with serene, curious, confident acceptance. Namaste.